Did you ever truly love our mummy?
Yes, I truly loved her.
Please promise us you won't leave us ever again.
I promise, and I cross my heart.
What would you do if 3 kids who you didn't know of their existence walk up to you and say these exact words? Promise us you won't leave us again. The rain hit Seoul like a forbidden punishment. It came down in thick, angry sheets against the glass towers of Gangnam, flooding the gutters and blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and red along the wet asphalt. Thunder rolled somewhere far across the Han River, a low and distant warning, the kind the city's residents had learned to ignore the way they ignored everything inevitable. No ordinary person would be out on a night like this. Not without very good reason, and not without wishing they were somewhere dry, somewhere warm, somewhere that wasn't standing between a powerful man and wherever he was going. The convoy of 7 black SUVs moved through the hospital's private entrance with the practiced efficiency of a machine that had been tuned over years of exactness. They arrived without sirens, without announcement, without the kind of theater that lesser organizations still found necessary. They simply appeared, smooth and inevitable, like weather. Security guards straightened their spines before the vehicles even stopped. Nurses clutched their clipboards. Doctors who had been mid-conversation fell silent mid-sentence, their words dying in the air as the information moved through the building with a speed that had nothing to do with announcements. Word moved through the hospital the way a cold draft moves through a cracked window, fast, invisible, and impossible to ignore. Everyone felt it before anyone explained it. Jae-Hyuk had arrived. He stepped out of the center vehicle last, unhurried, the collar of his black coat turned up against the rain that his guards had already blocked with umbrellas he hadn't asked for. He was tall, the kind of tall that made rooms feel smaller, and his face had the still, carved quality of a man who had long since stopped feeling the need to explain himself to anyone. The sharp jaw, the set of his eyes, dark and measuring, taking in every corner of every space before committing to a step. The way he moved, and not fast, never fast, but with the completeness of someone who does not waste motion. He had not been born this way. He had built this way, carefully, out of necessity, over years of living in a world where showing anything at all was a form of surrender. Kang Dae-sung, his right-hand man of 9 years, walked 1 step behind him and to the left, eyes already scanning every corner of the hospital lobby as the glass doors slid open. Dae-sung was good at his job, the way machinery is good at its job, reliably, without drama, without requiring management. He had learned long ago that the best way to serve Han Jae-Hyuk was to anticipate and to say very little. The lobby fell silent the moment they crossed the threshold. It always did. There was a particular quality to the silence that followed Jae-Hyuk into rooms. Not the silence of respect exactly, though there was some of that. More the silence of people becoming very still in the presence of something they understand, on a cellular level, not to disturb. He moved through the hospital corridor like a current of cold air. His footsteps unhurried and deliberate on the polished floor. His security team flanked at precise intervals. No one met his eyes. A nurse turned away with studied casualness, her ponytail swinging. An orderly pushing a trolley wheeled it hastily toward a side alcove. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to adjust somehow, as though the building itself was trying not to draw attention to itself. He had a meeting on the 4th floor, a business matter, the kind that couldn't be discussed over the phone, the kind that required the physical presence of parties who wanted to look each other in the face when they made their commitments. He was not here for sentiment, not here for drama, not here for anything that took more than 40 minutes. He was here to conclude something and leave. That was when 3 small children came running around the corner. They were perhaps 5 or 6 years old, and they ran with the wild, reckless energy of children who have not yet learned to be afraid of the things adults fear. 2 boys and a girl, all dressed in oversized hospital sweaters that were clearly not theirs. The kind of spare clothing a hospital provides when a family arrives with nothing. Their small feet pattered against the floor tiles. They were clearly looking for someone. Their eyes swept the corridor with a desperate, scanning urgency that was too old for their faces, too practiced, as though they had spent a long time searching for things and not finding them. Then one of the boys stopped. He pointed directly at Han Jae-Hyuk. and then all three of them ran straight toward him. His security team moved instantly. Two guards stepped forward, arms out, enough bodies forming a wall with the automatic precision of people who have done this 1,000 times. "Stop there," one of them began. But the children were already past them, ducking under outstretched arms with the effortless agility of small things that don't understand the concept of barriers, and suddenly all three of them had their small hands gripping the front of Jae-Hyuk's coat. The guard reached for them. Jae-Hyuk raised one hand. The guard stopped. The entire corridor went silent. Even the distant sound of rain against the windows seemed to pull back, as though the world itself was pausing to pay attention. And in that silence, barely above a whisper, so quiet that the men around them had to strain to hear it, one of the boys looked up at Jae-Hyuk with enormous dark eyes and said, "Promise us, you won't leave us again." The girl tightened her grip on his coat with both hands. The other boy pressed his forehead against Jae-Hyuk's sleeve, the way a child does when they are too tired and too scared to hold themselves upright anymore. Their small bodies trembled, not from cold, not from the rain they had escaped from earlier, from something much deeper than cold. From the specific trembling of children who have learned that the people they love can disappear without warning and without goodbye. Jae-Hyuk, the most feared man in Seoul, stood completely still. He had faced armed men without blinking. He had sat across negotiating tables from people who wanted him dead and finished his tea before responding. He had built an empire on the precise management of fear, other people's fear, always, never his own. And he had been so good at it for so long that he had begun to believe the architecture of his control was permanent, immovable, his. But in this moment, with three small pairs of hands gripping his coat and three small bodies trembling against him, something happened to his face that none of the men around him had ever seen before. Something moved beneath the surface of his expression and then stopped, caught, like a word he had started saying and then thought better of. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know these children. And yet, something about them, something in the line of their faces, says something in the impossible specificity of the way they were holding on to him, felt like a wound he had forgotten he was carrying. You felt that, didn't you? Subscribe now and stay with us, because this story is only just beginning. Who are these children? Jae-Hyuk's voice was quiet. That was always more dangerous than when he raised it. His men understood this by instinct. Kang Dae-sung was already on his earpiece, already pulling up the hospital's patient registry on his phone, with the practiced calm of a man who was very good at finding information quickly. "Unknown to us, sir. Running it now." The guards moved to separate the children from him, carefully, because even they understood that something unusual was happening, and that unusual things in the presence of Jae-Hyuk required extra delicacy. And the girl let go when a guard's hands came near her. The boys did not. One of them, the one who had spoken, tilted his head back and looked up at Jae-Hyuk with a directness that most grown men in this man's presence did not manage to hold for more than a few seconds. "Don't go," the boy said. His voice was steady. It should not have been that steady. He was 6 years old. "Not again, please." Again. Jae-Hyuk crouched slowly, fluidly, until he was at eye level with the child. This caused an almost imperceptible ripple through his security team, their employer kneeling in a hospital corridor for a child who had grabbed his coat. Up close, Jae-Hyuk could see the dark circles under all three sets of eyes. He could see the residue of dried tears on the girl's cheek, and he could see that all three of them were carrying the particular exhaustion of children who have not had a stable night's sleep in a very long time. And he could see something else, something in the architecture of their faces, in the particular angle of their cheekbones and the set of their eyes, that made the air in his chest feel suddenly strange, as though his lungs had forgotten for a moment how the arrangement was supposed to work. "Who told you to come to me?" he asked. "Nobody," the girl said. She had stopped trembling now that he had crouched down. She seemed to be one of those people who become calmer when things become direct. "We saw you from the window upstairs. Sadiq said it was you." The boy named Sadiq lifted his chin slightly, confirming it without apology. "You know me?" Jae-Hyuk asked. He kept his voice level and neutral. Inside, something was moving that he could not yet name. "From the picture," Sadiq said. He reached into the pocket of his hospital sweater with the careful deliberateness of someone protecting something precious. What he pulled out was a photograph. Small, worn soft at the edges, the kind that has been handled so many times it has taken on the texture of cloth. He held it out. Jae-Hyuk took it. The photograph showed two people standing outside a small cafe on a street he recognized immediately and viscerally. The way you recognize a place that mattered to you. A street near Hongik University. A street he had not walked down in 7 years but could still trace in his memory with complete accuracy. The man in the photo was younger, less severe around the eyes, his face carrying an expression that looked almost uncomfortable now, like seeing a version of yourself you had carefully put away. The woman beside him was laughing. Actually laughing, her head thrown back slightly, her hand resting on his arm with the casual ease of someone who has stopped needing to perform happiness and simply feels it. She was beautiful in the specific way of someone who is not thinking about being looked at. Her skin was deep brown and luminous, even in the faded quality of the old photo. Her hair was natural and full, free around her face. She was wearing a green jacket that Jae-Hyuk recognized because it had been his, because she had borrowed it on a cold night and never given it back, and because he had never asked for it. He remembered the exact day this photograph was taken. He remembered the light. And he remembered the particular quality of the cold. It had been October, early evening, the kind of autumn air that smells like something ending. He remembered that she had laughed at something he said, and he had been so surprised by the sound that he'd gone very still, the way you go still when something unexpected lands perfectly. He remembered who had taken it. He remembered everything. "Zainab," he said. The name came out of him before he made any decision to say it, called up from somewhere that didn't run through conscious thought. The girl's eyes widened. "You know Mama's name?" The word Mama landed in the center of his chest. He looked at the photograph again. He looked at the children. He did the arithmetic that he had been avoiding doing since the moment they'd run toward him. And the arithmetic came out the same way every time he tried it. Han Jae-Hyuk stood slowly. He looked at Kang Dae-sung over the children's heads. His voice, when he spoke, carried absolutely nothing. No anger, no confusion, no feeling of any visible kind. Just precision. Just the clean edges of a command. Find out everything. Now. 7 years ago, Han Jae-Hyuk had not yet become the thing people whispered about over business dinners and in the back rooms of establishments that didn't exist on any public registry. He was 26 years old, technically the deputy director of a legitimate investment management firm, actually the operational backbone of his father's criminal empire. Handling logistics, personnel, with the quiet enforcement of arrangements that required someone ruthless enough to follow through and intelligent enough not to leave evidence. He was efficient at it. He was disciplined. He had accepted the life he was born into the way someone accepts a geographic feature, a mountain range, a sea. It was simply the landscape of his existence. He was also, in the precise clinical sense of the word, completely alone, not without people. He had his father, his mother, Dae-sung, a structure of men and women who depended on him and respected him in the particular way that people respect something they understand is dangerous, but alone in the way that matters. Alone in the sense of having no one who knew him outside the architecture of power and obligation. No one who had seen him in an unguarded moment and chosen afterward to stay. Then he had decided at some point in his early 20s that this was the correct configuration for his life. Attachment was leverage. Leverage was vulnerability. And vulnerability was the one luxury a man in his position could not afford. He met Zainab Diallo on a Tuesday night in October in a cafe near Hongik University, and she disrupted that configuration without any apparent effort or awareness that she was doing it. He had gone to the cafe because one of his informants had flagged the location as a regular dead drop point for a competitor organization. He was there to observe, to sit quietly in a corner, review a file, and note who came and went at what times. Nothing more. He ordered coffee he didn't intend to drink and opened a folder he intended to look engaged with. 20 minutes later, Nishi came to take his order again because he hadn't touched the first cup. "Is there something wrong with it?" she asked. Her Korean was excellent and slightly accented in a way he couldn't immediately place. No, he said. You haven't touched it. I know. She looked at him for a moment, openly, curiously, without the calculated assessment he was used to from people who knew who he was, and without the instinctive unease he was used to from people who didn't but sensed something. She just looked at him the way you look at a puzzle you find genuinely interesting. She had a small notebook in her hand, and she was tapping it against her palm, thinking. Are you waiting for someone? She asked. No. Then you're avoiding going home. He looked up from his folder. In his adult life, no one had spoken to him with this kind of casual directness. People who knew who he was did not ask him casual questions or make small observations about his state of mind. People who didn't know who he was usually still sensed something, and either became very formal or very careful. This woman just stood there, head slightly tilted, pen tapping, genuinely curious. I'm working, he said. At a cafe, she said. In the corner, alone, without touching your coffee. She smiled. And the smile was not mocking, just amused. The smile of someone who sees a slightly absurd thing and finds it endearing, rather than irritating. That's avoiding going home. She went to take another table's order before he could respond. Then he watched her cross the room with the particular attention of someone who has just been caught off guard and is trying to understand how it happened. He stayed another hour. He ordered a second coffee and actually drank it. When he left, he tipped more than the bill was worth and told himself it was not because of her. He went back the following Tuesday. Her name was Zainab Diallo. She was 24, a graduate student from Senegal studying urban development policy at the university. The cafe job covered her rent, 3 evenings a week, tip money that she tracked carefully in a small notebook she carried everywhere. She had been in Seoul for 2 years. Her Korean was the result of 6 months of obsessive study before she arrived and 2 years of daily practice, and she spoke it with an accent she was completely unapologetic about. When people corrected her pronunciation, she thanked them once, and then continued saying it her way. She was brilliant in the specific, inconvenient way of people who think faster than the conversation and have to consciously slow down so others can follow. She was also warm, genuinely instinctively warm, in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. She was warm the way a fire is warm, not performing anything, just being what it was. She found out who he was eventually, not from him, from a careless comment made by one of his junior men who came into the cafe one evening while Jae-Hyuk was there, and who said something stupid in the confident way of people who don't realize they've said anything significant. She was quiet for a long time after the man left. And then she looked at Jae-Hyuk across the table and said, Is that supposed to change something? It usually does, he said. He was watching her face carefully, tracking for the moment when the calculation happened, when she weighed what he was against what knowing him could offer or cost. She went back to her notes. Then she looked up again. Does it change something for you? Who you are to me? He didn't answer immediately. No, he said finally. Then it doesn't change anything, she said. He fell in love with her the way someone falls into a deep body of water, completely without warning, with no immediate understanding of how serious the situation was until it was already too late to do anything but adapt to the new conditions. The process was slow and then sudden, the way these things always are. One evening he realized that he had been happy, actually straightforwardly happy, for the preceding 3 hours, and that he could not remember the last time before this that he had been able to say that. For the first time in his adult life, he felt something he could not engineer. He began quietly and carefully to plan. He was going to find a way out of the empire. Not immediately, not carelessly, but deliberately. There were arrangements that needed restructuring. There were debts that needed settling. There were conversations he needed to have with his father about succession and transition. None of it was simple. All of it was possible, given enough time. He had not told Zainab any of this yet. He was going to. He had been building toward the conversation for 3 months. He never got to have it. Madame Han Mi-suk discovered the relationship on a Wednesday. By Friday, she had already acted. She was a woman who had spent 20 years constructing and maintaining an empire through the precise application of patience, ruthlessness, and the absolute refusal to allow sentiment to interfere with strategy. She was not opposed to her son having personal relationships. She was opposed to relationships that created vulnerabilities she couldn't control or complications that threatened the family's position. A foreign graduate student with no connections, no money, no understanding of what this family actually was, and no leverage that could be managed. This was not a relationship. This was a liability wearing the face of one. She did not involve Jae-Hyuk. She understood her son well enough to know that a direct confrontation would calcify his position rather than dissolve it. He had always been stubborn in the way of people who have formed their own conclusions and do not respond to external pressure to revise them. So she went around him. She met Zainab privately on a Thursday afternoon, in a private dining room at a club that Zainab had no way of refusing the invitation to, without making an enemy she couldn't afford. She arranged for the meeting to happen on a day when Jae-Hyuk was managing a business matter 3 hours out of Seoul. He had no idea the meeting was taking place. Madame Han was not theatrical about threats. That was a quality of people who were uncertain of their own power. She was completely certain. She sat across from Zainab with the composed elegance of a woman accustomed to rooms that bent to her preferences. She poured the tea herself. She asked polite questions about the graduate program, about Zainab's family in Senegal, about the thesis work. She was warm. She was interested. She was everything a future mother-in-law might hope to be in a first meeting. And then, still in the same warm tone, she explained several things. She explained the nature of the Han family's actual business, with a level of specificity that made it immediately clear that she was not speaking hypothetically. She explained the kinds of enemies that came with that business, and the kinds of things those enemies were willing to do when they wanted to create pressure. She explained that foreign nationals in the country on student visas were, in certain circumstances, remarkably easy to locate and to make uncomfortable. She explained that academic funding was, in other circumstances, remarkably easy to have redirected. She said all of this without raising her voice. She smiled when she was finished. She poured a second cup of tea. Then she told Zainab that there was a simple solution to all of this complexity. Leave. Write a note. Make it convincing. Make it the kind of note that closed a door rather than opened a question. Disappear from Jae-Hyuk's life quietly and completely. In exchange, nothing of the kind she'd described would happen. Zainab's visa status would be secure. Her scholarship would continue. Her family, back in Dakar, would remain undisturbed. Money, a meaningful amount, would be transferred to an account she would be given access to. None she could finish her degree. She could build her life. She would simply do it somewhere that was not Seoul, and with someone who was not Han Jae-Hyuk. Zainab sat very still throughout this conversation. She had grown up in a household that did not have power, and she understood clearly what it looked like when it was being aimed at you. She understood the anatomy of a threat dressed in courtesy. She understood that the woman sitting across from her had already decided the outcome of this conversation before Zainab sat down, and that what was happening now was simply the notification. She left the private dining room and walked back to her apartment through streets that all looked suddenly different, as though the city had revised its opinion of her between the time she'd left that morning and the time she was returning. She did not call Jae-Hyuk. She sat on the floor of her small apartment, her back against the bed, and she stayed there for a very long time. She thought about what Madame Han had not said, which was that Jae-Hyuk himself would be the instrument of the threat. Not directly, not intentionally, but by proximity, by association. The enemies of the Han family didn't need to be directed at her. They only needed to notice her. She thought about something else. Something she had been trying to find the right words for, the right moment for, the right version of courage for. She had discovered it 5 days earlier. She had taken 3 tests because she hadn't trusted the first 2. All 3 had said the same thing. She was pregnant. She sat on the floor of her apartment with this knowledge and with the knowledge of what Madame Han had said. And she put them together and she understood with a clarity that was almost physical what she needed to do. Not because she was weak, not because she didn't love him, because she did. more than she had known it was possible to love someone she had known for less than a year. But because she was carrying lives that were not yet lives, that were still possibility, that needed to become real somewhere safe before anything else could happen. She was alone in this city. She had no family here, no leverage, no protection. Madame Han had made clear, in the precise and terrifying language of someone who has done this before, exactly what she was capable of. Zainab made her decision by 4 in the morning. She wrote the note, short, cold, and the kind of note designed to close a door so completely that the person on the other side would stop reaching for the handle. This world is too dangerous for me. Forget me. Z. She left it at the cafe with the owner, addressed to him by first name. Then she packed what she could carry in one bag, transferred her remaining money, and booked the first flight she could find to Dakar. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she was carrying 3 lives inside her, and she had to get them somewhere safe. And safe was not here. Back in the present, in a private waiting room on the 3rd floor of the hospital, Han Jae-Hyuk sat in a chair that was slightly too small for him and watched 3 children sleep. They had been moved here, to a quieter space, and away from the corridor and the guards and the ambient tension of his presence, with blankets that a nurse had produced and a plate of food that all 3 of them had eaten with the focused efficiency of children who had learned not to take meals for granted. Sadiq had fought sleep for almost an hour, sitting upright in the chair with his arms folded, tracking Jae-Hyuk's face with those careful measuring eyes. Eventually, his body had won the argument that his will had been losing for days, and he had tipped sideways against his sister and gone under. All 3 of them were asleep now. Jae-Hyuk sat across from them and looked at their faces in the quiet, and something in his chest did what it had been trying not to do since the moment in the corridor. He thought about the note. 8 words. Forget me. As he had read those 8 words so many times in the weeks after she disappeared that they had stopped being words and started being just shapes. Just a rhythm of consonants and vowels that carried the weight of a verdict he hadn't appealed because he'd believed completely that the verdict was just. She had seen his world clearly and she had chosen to exit it. He had deserved that. He had always known on some level that the things he carried were not compatible with the life someone like her deserved. He had believed her completely, and he had hated her for it. Not loudly, not with any visible expression, but with the cold, slow, internal kind of hatred that is really just love that has had its back broken and has gotten very, very good at walking anyway. He had used it. He had used the heartbreak the way he used everything, as fuel. And he had turned it into the last layer of distance between himself and anything that could hurt him. And he had built the empire the rest of the world was afraid of on top of it. And now 3 children slept in borrowed hospital blankets in front of him. Dae-sung knocked and entered quietly. He held a folder. His expression carried the careful neutrality of someone who has received information that requires management. Patient records confirm it, he said, keeping his voice low. Zainab Diallo, admitted 3 weeks ago, severe cardiac stress syndrome, underlying factors including prolonged sleep deprivation and malnutrition. He paused. She's in room 412. She's been unconscious on and off. The attending physician says she's stable, but it's not clear-cut, sir. The DNA testing. Arranged. Private lab. Results in 4 hours. Another pause. Sir, the children's records, they're listed as her dependents. No other contacts. No emergency contact. The hospital has been... They've been letting the children stay because there was nowhere else for them to go. Jae-Hyuk absorbed this. She came back to Seoul 8 months ago. Dae-sung continued. Work visa. She completed the doctorate. She's been doing consultancy work. I can get the details on the specific room 412, Jae-Hyuk said. He stood. Dae-sung nodded and stepped aside. The corridor between the waiting room and room 412 was perhaps 60 meters. Jae-Hyuk covered it in the same unhurried way he covered every physical distance, deliberately, completely, without rushing, without hesitating. But inside the deliberateness, something was moving faster than his steps, and the door to room 412 was slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see the blue glow of monitoring equipment, He could see the clean geometry of the hospital bed, the IV stand beside it, the drip line running to a hand resting on top of the covers. He could see the hand. He pushed the door open. He stood at the foot of the bed, and he looked at her. Zainab Diallo. 7 years older and thinner in a way that spoke not of deliberate choice, but of prolonged hardship. The specific thinness of someone who has been pouring themselves out for a long time without adequate replenishment. There were shadows under her eyes that the unconsciousness hadn't fully erased. Her breathing was steady but shallow. The monitoring equipment marked time with quiet regularity. Her face in sleep was still, composed, and carrying in its stillness something that looked almost like relief. The particular relief of a body that has finally been allowed to stop moving. That has been moving and moving and moving for so long it had forgotten what rest felt like, and has now had the decision made for it by the body's own refusal to continue. Jae-Hyuk, the most feared man in Seoul, stood at the foot of her bed. He stayed there for a long time, not moving. He thought about the 8 words. He thought about the photograph. He thought about 3 children sleeping down the corridor in borrowed blankets, all of them carrying his face in their faces, in a way that no DNA test was going to tell him anything he didn't already know. He pulled the chair from beside the wall and placed it next to the bed. He sat down. He was still wearing his coat, and he didn't take it off. He did not leave. The DNA results arrived at 2:47 in the morning. Dae-sung brought the sealed envelope to the waiting room, which had become, over the course of the night, an unofficial command center. One of Jae-Hyuk's men had brought a laptop. Another had organized the guard rotation. The night nurse had stopped asking questions about the unusual number of large men in expensive dark clothing, who seemed to be permanently stationed on this floor. The 3 children were in the room next door. A nurse assigned exclusively to them reported that Zaid and Samar were sleeping. Sadiq had negotiated in the very specific way of a child who does not accept no from strangers for a chair to be placed beside the window where he could see the corridor, and had then been defeated by his own exhaustion and was now also asleep in the chair, his head on the windowsill. Jae-Hyuk opened the envelope. He read the document. He set it down on the table. He looked at the wall for approximately 30 seconds. Kang Dae-sung stood across the table and looked at a point slightly to the left of his employer's head and said absolutely nothing. He had worked for this man for 9 years. He knew when silence was the only thing that fit. "They're mine," Jae-Hyuk said. The words came out flat, factual, in the tone of someone reading a result they had already calculated and are now simply confirming. "All 3 of them." "Yes, sir." He picked the document up again and read it again. The clinical certainty of the language, the percentages, 99.97% for each of the 3, and the 3 separate test results arranged in columns, each one saying the same undeniable thing in the bloodless vocabulary of science. He set it down again. "She was pregnant when she left," he said. "She must have been," Dae-sung said. Carefully, because this was the kind of sentence that had weight on every possible side. "She didn't tell me." He said this not with anger but with the quality of someone working through a logic problem, turning it, examining the angles, trying to find the one where it made sense as something a person did voluntarily. He couldn't find it. He kept arriving at the same point. "Pull everything you can access on my mother's activity from 7 years ago. Her calendar, her calls, anything she arranged or paid for in the 6-week window before Zainab left. Everything." Dae-sung was quiet for a moment. And there was a quality to this particular silence, a slight hesitation, the kind that comes when a man is navigating between loyalty to his employer and the awareness that what his employer is asking for could lead somewhere very significant. "Sir," he said, "everything, Dae-sung, please." It took 4 hours. By the time the picture assembled itself fully, the rain had stopped and the first gray light of a Seoul morning was beginning to separate the buildings from the sky. Jae-Hyuk sat with the information arranged in front of him. Call logs, a financial transfer to a third-party account that had been opened and closed in the same month, a credit to that same account on the exact date of Zainab's departure, and a restaurant reservation for a private dining room on a Thursday that corresponded precisely with a day he had been in Incheon handling a logistics matter. He looked at it for a long time. Then he drove to his mother's house. It was 6:15 in the morning when he rang the bell. The housekeeper who answered the door had the expression of someone who had been warned to expect this, which meant his mother had been called ahead by staff who monitored things on her behalf. She received him in the sitting room in a dressing gown, her tea already poured, her posture already arranged into the composition of a woman who has decided how this conversation is going to go. "You knew," he said. He stood in the center of the room. He did not sit. "Jae-Hyuk, you knew she was pregnant when she left." His mother's hand settled more precisely around her teacup. "I did not know at the time of our conversation. I discovered it afterward. And you said nothing. I thought, you thought." His voice was so controlled it was almost gentle. Almost. "You thought, alone, without consulting anyone who had any stake in the matter, and you decided that 3 children would grow up without their father because your thought required it." He walked to the window. Outside, her garden was perfect in the early morning light. Every hedge level, every path edged, everything exactly where she had decided it should be. 7 years, Yama. 3 children. Growing up in hardship, in hiding, without their father. Because you arranged it. I was protecting this family. She kept her voice even, but her knuckles had gone slightly pale around the teacup. That woman, her name, he said quietly, is Zainab. A pause. That woman had nothing in common with who we are or what we need. You would have thrown away everything this family has built for a feeling, an infatuation that she is the mother of my children. He turned from the window. His face was completely still, in the way that was not calm, but was something that lived just beneath calm, controlled by sheer force of will. She raised 3 children alone, because you threatened her, because you arranged her departure, because you made a decision about my life that was not yours to make. You kept my children from me. He let this sit in the air between them for a moment. You need to understand what I'm telling you. Not as your son, as Han Jae-Hyuk. You will not approach those children. You will not approach their mother. You will not make any further decisions that touch any part of my life or the lives of the people in it. This is not a negotiation. This is information. He turned and walked toward the door. Jae-Hyuk. Her voice stopped him. It had a quality in it he had not heard before. Not authority, something less certain than authority. He stopped. He didn't turn. I thought I was protecting you, she said. I know, he said. He left. She sat in her sitting room in the early morning quiet, and for the first time in 20 years, Madame Han Mi-suk was not entirely certain she had done the right thing. It was an unfamiliar sensation. She held it the way you hold something hot. Carefully, yin at arm's length, not entirely sure what to do with it. This is the moment. Drop your comment right now. Did she deserve forgiveness? Like the video and keep watching. Zainab woke on the 4th day. She came back to consciousness slowly, the way a person does when their body has been fighting and is not entirely certain the fighting is over. Light first, diffuse, clinical, the particular quality of hospital fluorescence. Then sound, monitors somewhere, marking time with quiet authority. Then sensation, the weight of the IV in her left hand, the slight pressure of the monitoring clip on her finger, the unfamiliar softness of a bed that was not the one she'd been sleeping in for the past 8 months. Then voices, close, familiar, small. She would have known those voices in a fire, in a flood, in the deep dark of a sleeping city. And she would have known them anywhere. Sadiq's voice, firm and clear, telling someone something with the absolute conviction of a child who has decided he is correct and is simply notifying the world. Zaid's quieter response. Samar saying something that made both boys exhale in that particular way that means they've decided she's right. Her children were nearby. They were okay. Zainab exhaled all the way. She turned her head, and she saw Han Jae-Hyuk sitting in the chair beside her bed. He was not asleep. He was watching her with the focused attention of someone who has been watching for a while. Not obsessively, not with the quality of surveillance, but with the specific attention of someone who has been waiting for a thing to happen and is trying to be present for the moment when it does. He looked like he had slept in the chair, and he looked like he had been in it for more than one night. His coat was still on. His expression, when she met his eyes, was something she had not prepared for. She had prepared for anger. She had run through versions of this encounter in her mind across 7 years, in Dakar, in the apartment, in Yoido, in the hospital room in the weeks since she'd arrived here, and anger had been the constant in every version. Cold anger, controlled anger, the quiet devastating precision of Han Jae-Hyuk communicating displeasure. She had prepared for that. She had prepared things to say, explanations, not apologies. She had decided alone in the hospital room that she was not going to apologize for keeping her children safe, but explanations. Context. The facts of what had happened arranged in an order that could be followed. She had not prepared for him to look at her the way he was looking at her, like someone who has just been given back something they had stopped believing they deserved. Jae-Hyuk. Her voice came out rougher than she expected, dry, barely there, the voice of someone who has not spoken in days. She swallowed. "How long?" "4 days," he said. His voice was quiet, not guarded, just quiet. "The children, they're in the room next door. They've been fed, they've slept, they're okay." Something shifted in his expression. The faintest trace of something lighter, though it was pressed under too much weight to fully surface. Sadiq gave me a comprehensive briefing on their dietary preferences, their sleep schedules, and his personal assessment of the hospital food at approximately 3 in the morning 2 days ago. He had notes. Zainab stared at him. "He used his fingers to count the points," Jae-Hyuk said. Something broke open in her chest. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She pressed the back of her free hand against her mouth and breathed through it. "I didn't want them to find you and then lose you," she said, when she could speak again. The words came without prelude, without the careful arrangement she'd planned. "Your world. I couldn't bring them into it knowing what could happen. Your mother told me." She explained exactly what she was capable of, and I believed her. I was alone here. I had no leverage. I had nothing, and I was... She stopped. "I had just found out about the pregnancy. I found out 5 days before she contacted me. I hadn't told you yet. I was trying to find the right..." She stopped again. Because his expression had changed. "She contacted you when you were already pregnant," he said. "Yes." He absorbed this. She could see him absorbing it, the way he processed everything. Completely, without visible reaction, taking it all the way in before deciding what to do with it. "I know what she did," he said. "I know what she arranged and when. I confronted her this morning." He looked down at his hands for a moment. "This is not... I want you to understand that I am not here to put any part of this on you. What happened was arranged around you, not by you. I know that now." Jae-Hyuk. "I missed 6 years," he said. He said it simply, without self-pity, without performance. Just the fact of it. "I missed 6 years of their lives. I don't know how to put that right. I don't know if it can be put right. But I'm not going to compound it." He looked up at her. "Whatever you decide, about us, about everything else, those children will not want for anything. I will be present in their lives. That's not conditional on anything. That's just what's going to happen." She looked at him for a long moment. "You sound very certain." "I am," he said. "It's one of approximately 3 things I've been certain of in the last 4 days." "What are the other 2? He was quiet for a moment. "That I should have fought harder to find you when you left. And that I should have been honest with you sooner about what I was trying to build toward." He paused. "I was planning to leave. The organization. I'd been working on it for months before you disappeared. I hadn't told you because I wanted to have something concrete to offer before I asked you to trust the offer. By the time I had the architecture in place, you were gone." Zainab closed her eyes. She thought about a version of events in which she had told him first, in which she had not been alone in that apartment with the information and the threat, in which he had known. She thought about all the ways 7 years might have gone differently. And then she let the thought go because she was alive and her children were next door and they were running out of corridor to stand on opposite sides of. "Go get them," she said. He stood. "Jae-Hyuk." He paused. She held his gaze. They asked about you every week for 3 years. Then they stopped asking out loud, but I could tell they were still asking inside. I want you to know that. They chose you in that corridor before they even knew for certain it was you." He left without speaking, but the quality of his silence, as he went, was the kind that is full of things rather than empty of them. They were awake. All 3 of them in the hallway just outside the room door, sitting in a row on the bench that a thoughtful nurse had positioned there. They wore the same oversized sweaters. They had been given breakfast, and Zaid had a smudge of something at the corner of his mouth that he was not aware of. Samar was braiding a small section of her own hair. Sadiq sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the door. When Jae-Hyuk came through it, all 3 of them stood up at exactly the same moment. He crossed the distance between them and crouched down, at their level. He looked at each of their faces in turn. Slowly, the way you look at something you want to remember completely, not just the general impression, but the specific details. Sadiq, with those careful, watchful eyes that had taken the measure of everything and had already come to a provisional conclusion. Zaid, pressing his lips together very hard, fighting something that was close to the surface. Samar, her arms slightly extended at her sides, already in the posture of someone who has decided to hug and is just waiting for the right moment. "Can we see Mama?" Zaid asked. His voice cracked on the word. "In a moment," Jae-Hyuk said. "I want to tell you something first." The hallway was quiet. His guards had moved back. Dae-sung stood at the far end of the corridor, looking at nothing in particular, giving them the only privacy he could manufacture. "I didn't know about you," Jae-Hyuk said. He said it slowly and directly and without trying to soften it into something easier, because he thought they deserved the unshortened version. "I didn't know you existed. I know that is very hard to understand. I know it might not feel true, but it is true, and I need you to know it because I need you to know that the reason I wasn't there was not because I chose not to be." Sadiq was very still. "Mama told us," Samar said. "She said you didn't know. She said it wasn't your fault." She was right. He looked at Sadiq, because Sadiq was the one who needed this most, the one who had been carrying the weight of the unanswered version of events, who had been doing the accounting that children do when they are trying to understand why they are missing something everyone else seems to have. "I am going to be here now," Jae-Hyuk said. "Yeah, that is not going to change. I don't know yet how we work out all the pieces of what comes next. There's a lot we have to figure out together, slowly. But I am not going anywhere. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Sadiq held his gaze for a long time. The way he held it, direct, unflinching, with the quality of someone conducting a final evaluation rather than asking a question, was so precisely the way Jae-Hyuk himself looked at people who were telling him something important that the resemblance was almost startling. "Promise," Sadiq said. "Not a request, a condition." "I promise," Jae-Hyuk said. "I will not leave you again." Zaid moved first. He was always the one who moved from the heart without checking first with the head. And he moved now, stepped forward and pressed himself against Jae-Hyuk with the full force of a child who has been holding something tightly for too long and has finally been given permission to let it go. Samar followed, her arms going around his neck, her face pressing into his shoulder. Sadiq was last, and the quality of his moving was different. Deliberate, decided, the movement of someone who has weighed a thing and come to a conclusion. But when he moved all the way, his hands gripping the front of Jae-Hyuk's coat, exactly as they had in the hospital lobby 4 days ago when they had run toward a stranger and somehow, improbably, correctly known. Jae-Hyuk closed his arms around all 3 of them. He pressed his face briefly against the top of Sadiq's head. And he held them the way you hold things you almost lost before you knew you had them. He didn't let go until they were ready. 3 weeks later, the garden of the Han estate had become a different country. The change had happened so gradually and then so completely that the staff, who had worked in this house for years and had learned to move quietly through its particular atmosphere of controlled severity, found themselves adjusting to something they had no previous template for. The first sign had been the toys. Certain items had appeared in the east corridor and the second-floor landing, placed there by children who treated the entire house as simply a larger version of wherever they happened to be. Then there had been the evening when the sound of running came from the upper floor. Small feet and laughter and someone, Samar, high from the pitch, declaring something with great authority. Then there had been the afternoon when the head of security had found Han Jae-Hyuk in the garden, sitting cross-legged on the lawn with Zaid, pointing out clouds. Kang Dae-sung found his employer on the south lawn on a Thursday afternoon, in the middle of what appeared to be a formal dispute about the rules of a game that Sadiq had invented and was now accused of revising retroactively in his own favor. The argument was being conducted with great seriousness on both sides. Samar was refereeing with an impartiality that both parties seemed to resent equally. Zaid had at some point decided the dispute was not his concern and was lying on his back in the grass, watching the sky with the complete contentment of someone who has decided that the present moment is sufficient. Dae-sung stood at the edge of the lawn for a while. He watched his employer concede 2 boundary points to a 6-year-old, renegotiate the terms of 3 rules, and then joined Zaid on the grass to examine a cloud that Zaid had identified as resembling a very large and possibly angry fish. Dae-sung had over 9 years seen Han Jae-Hyuk in many configurations. He had seen him manage crises. He had seen him face threats. He had seen him at the center of rooms where the air was thick with the awareness of what he was capable of. He had never before this month seen him lie on grass and consider clouds. He decided not to interrupt. There was nothing that urgently required interruption. He went back inside. Upstairs in the suite on the 2nd floor, Zainab was recovering. Slower than anyone wanted, or faster than the doctors had initially projected. She had argued twice about the arrangements, the suite, the private nursing staff, the level of resource being applied to her recovery, and Jae-Hyuk had listened to both arguments with complete attentiveness and then proceeded with the arrangements. She had told him he was impossible. He had agreed that this was accurate and asked if she needed anything. On an afternoon in late spring, she sat by the window with a book she was not reading and looked at the garden below. Her children were down there. She could hear them, Sadiq's voice, precise and argumentative, and then the sound of the argument dissolving into laughter, and then all 3 of them, and the man they had chosen, lying in the grass like they had all the time in the world. She watched this for a long time. She thought about the version of herself who had packed a bag and booked a flight and written 8 words that were supposed to close a door permanently. She thought about what that version of herself had been trying to protect, and whether it had worked, and whether protection was even the right frame for what had happened in the years since. She thought about resilience, the specific, unremarkable, daily kind, the kind that is not dramatic but simply continues, that shows up in the morning and does what needs to be done. She thought about her children, who had grown up knowing that the world could take things from you, and that you kept going anyway. She thought about a man lying on grass, looking at clouds with his son. She didn't yet know what she and Jae-Hyuk were to each other now, beyond parents, no, beyond the shared project of 3 very specific people. She didn't need to know today. Today was sufficient. Today was her children laughing in a garden and the particular quality of late afternoon sunlight on the lawn below, and the understanding, settled now, solid, no longer requiring daily renegotiation, that this was real. He came upstairs when the children had been brought in for their evening routine. He knocked twice before entering, which had become a habit between them, an agreement that neither of them had formally made, but both of them honored. "Sadiq won," she said without turning from the window. "Sadiq cheated," Jae-Hyuk said. He pulled the chair close. He changed 2 rules mid-game and cited precedents he invented. "I know. I saw it from up here. You were watching." "I was watching." She turned from the window, as he was close enough that she could see the slight loosening around his eyes that had happened gradually over the past 3 weeks, the beginning of the unbuilding of the architecture of distance he'd spent a decade constructing. It was slow, it was not finished, but it was happening. "You should rest," he said. "You say that every evening. You resist it every evening. Because every evening I'm less tired than the evening before." She looked at him. "Stay and talk to me. Tell me something I don't know about you." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was settling into evening, the lights beginning to assert themselves against the fading sky, Seoul arranging itself for the night shift. I learned to make one dish, he said. Before the Empire, when I was at university, a very simple stew. I haven't made it since. He paused. Sadiq told me this afternoon that the hospital food was inadequate and that someone should cook something real. He made a specific request. Zainab smiled. She hadn't meant to. It arrived before she could manage it. Of course he did. I told him I would try. You're going to cook for them. I'm going to attempt it. His expression was doing the thing it did now. The thing where something warmer than he intended showed through the controlled surface. The thing he had apparently stopped fighting completely. It may not be good. They'll eat it anyway, she said. They've been waiting a long time for you to feed them something. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and between them was something that was not yet named and did not yet need to be. Rest, he said quietly. Stay, she said. He stayed. 3 hours later, in an unmarked sedan parked in the shadow of the service road that ran behind the eastern wall of the Han estate, a man reviewed a set of photographs on a tablet screen. Long-range shots, taken through a telephoto lens with the patience of someone who has done this kind of work for a long time and has learned that patience is the most important tool. There were shots of 3 children playing in the garden. Clear faces, ages consistent with what the research had indicated. Shots of the woman in the second-floor window, the woman who had reappeared in Seoul 8 months ago and had, until recently, not registered on anyone's radar as significant. And shots of Han Jae-Hyuk himself, lying on the grass in his garden with a child under each arm. They're looking at the sky with an expression that the man reviewing the photographs had never seen on the subject's face in 9 years of surveillance. The man composed a message on an encrypted application and sent it to a contact identified only by a 5-digit number. Children confirmed. 3 of them, 6 years old. The woman is recovering at the estate. He hasn't left them since they arrived. The response came back in less than 2 minutes, as responses to this contact always did. How does he look? The man studied the photograph on his screen. The most feared criminal operator in Seoul, watching clouds in his garden with his daughter on his shoulder. Different, the man typed back. He looks completely different. The response was brief and final. Good, that means he's vulnerable. Move to the next phase. The sedan's engine started. It pulled slowly out of the service road shadow and into the network of Seoul's evening streets, quiet and unhurried, exactly like everything that is patient enough to wait for the right moment. Han Jae-Hyuk had spent a decade making himself into something that could not be hurt through the things he loved, because he had loved nothing. He had been ruthless in his discipline of this. He had been complete in it. And then 3 6-year-olds had run down a hospital corridor and grabbed his coat, and in 4 days they had quietly dismantled the work of 10 years. With their small hands and their tired eyes and their request for a promise. He had given them the promise. He intended to keep it. But somewhere in the shadows of the city he had built his power in. People who had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of opportunity had just found the door they'd been looking for. In the room at the end of the East Wing corridor, Sadiq woke up at midnight. He sat up in the dark and stayed very still and listened the way he had learned to listen. For irregularity, for the sound of something that didn't fit the pattern. He heard the guard pass on the regular schedule. He heard the distant sound of Seoul beyond the walls. He heard his brother breathing steadily in the next bed, and his sister murmuring something in her sleep. She always talked in her sleep, had done since she was 2, and the sound of it was as familiar and as steadying as anything Sadiq knew. He lay back down. He thought about his father's face when he'd said the promise. He thought about the way the word landed, I promise, and the quality of certainty underneath it, the specific texture of a man who has decided something completely and means every syllable. He thought about 6 years of looking at a photograph and understanding, at some level he couldn't have articulated, that the man in the picture was someone they were supposed to find. He thought about running down a corridor toward a stranger. He thought about the stranger catching them. He pressed his face into the pillow and let himself finally, all the way down, the specific descent of a child who has been holding himself upright for too long and has finally, in this house, in this room, with his family 2 doors away, been given permission to rest. He was asleep in minutes. Outside the estate walls, the sedan disappeared into the city. And the city breathed. The city waited. The city kept its secrets, as Seoul has always done, in the bright, indifferent glow of 10,000 lights. But something had changed in the architecture of Han Jae-Hyuk's world. Something irreversible. Something that he had chosen. Something that made him more human than he had been in a decade, and therefore more reachable than he had ever been. The most feared man in Seoul had found something worth protecting, and the people who had always known that protection was his only real vulnerability had just begun to move. The story of what came next was already being written in the dark. If this story moved you the way we think it did, hit like right now and subscribe so you're here when the next chapter drops. Drop a comment below. What do you think happens when the enemies come for the triplets? And share this with someone who needs to believe that love, real love, finds a way back. We will see you in the next one. Don't miss it.